It's just absolutely incredible.
So what are activists saying to you?
They're spitting venom.
The only things that have really cut through this campaign at all have been Nigel Farage coming back, D-Day, leaving D-Day early, and this Gamblegate stuff. Now, none of those are good for Rishi Sunak.
It's so easy as a politician or as a commentator to sort of adopt the pious tone and go, Krishnan, what really matters is what this says about our political culture. And this story is turning from a serious but quite small story into an absurd moral panic.
Right, well, so what does this tell us about our political culture, Scarlett? Hello and welcome to the Political Fourcast. We're in the final furlong of the election campaign and it's now completely dominated by the betting scandal. It's hogging the headlines, but is it a story on the scale of the expenses scandal or Partygate or just a bit of juvenile stupidity? The saga has caught wannabe MPs, campaign advisors and police officers so far. Every politician is now having to declare whether they've ever made a bet on an election, even if perfectly legal and innocent. Is it another final nail in the Conservative coffin, or is it more likely to drive voter apathy and general disgust with all politicians? Might it depress turnout next week? And what does all this say about the election campaign? In the vacuum of real discussion about the serious issues facing the country, have bets and blunders filled the void? With me today are ConservativeHome's Henry Hill, pollster Scarlett Maguire, and our very own Paul McNamara. Paul, just lay out how this story has escalated.
Okay, so there are various categories of bets that are going on here. We have two Conservative candidates who want to be MPs next time round. They've allegedly placed bets on the timing of when there was going to be an election in July. We've got two people from CCHQ, from Conservative Party headquarters, who have now taken a leave of absence. They're also being investigated by the Gambling Commission because they allegedly placed bets on the timing of the election. We have a Welsh Conservative who's also been investigated for alleged timing of bets. Then we have a Labour candidate who hasn't bet on the when, but the actual outcome. He bet on himself to lose, and he's been kicked out of the Labour Party now. And
they're all denying any criminal behaviour.
They are indeed.
But this is a question of judgment and whether they've just been stupid. And actually sort of people are being much more censorious than that, aren't they? I mean, Keir Starmer is very, very serious about it.
Davey's probably been the most serious about it, and he's been the most hardline about it right from the get-go. Keir Starmer's he's probably tried a middle ground, really, because a lot of time whenever we've asked him questions about what needs to be done with these candidates, they need to be kicked out of the party. The line that's kept on coming back is, no, this is something for the Conservative Party to deal with internally. But Ed Davey has been the one right from the get-go. No, we want a Cabinet Office inquiry. They need to be kicked out, and there needs to be much more hardline.
But it's got to the point now where literally every politician facing a journalist is being asked, when was the last time you placed a bet? Have you ever bet on an election?
Yes.
When was the last time you placed a bet? Have you ever bet on an election?
Ages ago. I did not bet on any of this at all. I'm clean.
Henry?
I got 25 to 1 on the Greens to win Brighton Pavilion in 2010.
You haven't bet since 2010?
No.
Wow.
He made so much money from that.
I lost some money on the horses at Ascot on Friday.
I won a little bit on Friday, but only a little bit, 30 quid. By the end of the day. Right, so, Scarlett, I mean, the question is, why is this escalating so much, and what do the public make of it?
Yeah,
is it really about betting, or is it about everything else that's gone before?
Quite right. It's about everything else that's gone before. So I think that the significance of this scandal is not that actually I think it puts sort of people off from the Conservatives who hadn't been put off already. It's that it reinforces negative opinions that people already held about not just the Conservative Party, not just Rishi Sunak, but politicians in general. Now, at the moment, that's obviously disproportionately hurting the Conservative Party. But we heard this when we did a focus group actually in Rishi Sunak's constituency of all places last week, just after the story broke. And there were people there who were directly making the comparison to Partygate. They were saying it's just like Partygate, shows a disregard for voters, shows they don't care what the public think, they're just in it for themselves, one rule for them, one rule for everything else. And all of it just plays into this lack of trust of politicians. And that's why you see in survey after survey, no matter how you ask it, this sort of record low trust in politicians and politics, this anti-politics that's very pervasive.
So it's certainly acted as a reminder of everything that goes back to, from the expenses scandal onwards. But in terms of sort of the Conservative decay as it's been portrayed. I mean, have your focus groups shown that people are still really angry about Partygate?
They are, yes. And I think it's one of those things that you can't say it enough, actually. I can't remember the last time. In fact, I don't think I've sat through a political focus group since Partygate where someone has not brought Partygate up. The damage it did to the Conservative brand, you cannot overstate it.
Henry, I mean, it's just another worst possible nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about it, even allowing for the fact that the Conservative campaign has been caught by surprise by the Prime Minister's announcement and is struggling. This should have been the period that was easiest for the Conservative Party, because with the gap as big as it is, media attention would naturally have focused on Labour more, right? There were stories about, are they going to put up council tax? There were all kinds of hairs they could have set running. Nigel Farage crossed over maybe a bit early, and so there's been more focus on Reform UK. If the Tories had just not done anything, they'd probably have had a pretty good week, media-wise. And yet, instead, for over a week, they've managed to keep wresting the spotlight back onto them. With this, it's just absolutely incredible.
So what are activists saying to you?
They're spitting venom at this point. I mean, there was already no love lost between activists and the centre anyway. They were angry about being surprised by the election. They were angry about the fact there were no candidates selected in over 100 seats. I've had candidates, and not just angry right-wing candidates like Andrea Jenkins. I've had candidates saying that they were going to start ignoring CCHQ's demand for central approval of all literature because they just weren't getting the okay in time. Some of them were worried their official mailing wouldn't go out before postal boats landed. And this, on top of all of that, for the people who are giving up their evenings and weekends to try and return Conservative MPs, is just an insult.
Paul, I mean, what have you picked up talking to politicians? I mean, if you think back to the beginning of the expenses scandal, there was quite a lot of, at the beginning, people were saying, well, yeah, but that's just the way the system works. This is like, you're expected to claim money in order to boost your income because your income's so low. And there was a real sense they didn't get that there was anything wrong. Has there been much sort of, what's the fuss about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to hear Henry's take on this, because so right from the get-go when this story broke, from MPs I was talking to, it started with like, is this that big deal? Like people take a punt on stuff. They got it with the nature of the bet and the timing, and was there potential insider information? So that they got on like, well, it's a bad look. Christ, he's been stupid. But when there were all of a sudden the rumours about there, are there going to be loads more? There were loads of rumours about there's loads of people implicated. It's going to be, and a lot of people were saying like, no, that's not the case. People just take a punt and that's it. But the thing that has evolved, talking to candidates and talking to what were backbench MPs, and of course now none of them are MPs, is the anger about the management of it. So Labour yesterday, when their guy gets found out of placing a bet on himself to lose, they didn't miss a beat. Straight away they came out, that guy has nothing to do with us now. He is no longer our candidate. He's not even a member of the party anymore. We have got rid of him. It's taken a couple of weeks.
And all he's done is place a bet.
Exactly.
On illegal bet.
On himself to lose. Yeah. But the very first allegation with the Conservative Party was 2 weeks ago, and it took 2 weeks to get any sort of action. And a lot of them, for them, it keeps coming back to Rishi Sunak is not dealing with these things quick enough. This is bad party management. This thing has just snowballed. We could have done it just nipping in the bud earlier.
Henry, is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because politics is a brutal game, right? Like, people are entitled to due process, but that doesn't mean if you're an MP or an ex-MP or standing to be an MP, you understand how it works. Rishi Sunak could have withdrawn the whip from the MP candidates involved and then said, if they're exonerated and they're returned to Parliament, that's fine. They'll get the whip back. But for now, we're withdrawing support. And he ended up having to do that anyway, but it took a week. And so it looks like he didn't want to do it. And so he gets no credit.
Scarlett, the thing that is slightly perplexing is we are a nation of gamblers. We have a national lottery. Millions of people place bets every week. And it's a pretty normal thing to do. So how sort of annoyed were people at the actual gambling?
I think it wasn't so much the actual gambling. I think, I think the problem is now, because of the sequence of things, politicians placing any bets on politics takes a slightly different tone to it now that people are angry to start with, because it's this idea that they're not taking it seriously enough. People always have that in the back of their mind about politicians anyway. They're not taking any of it seriously enough. And this just reinforces it. But no, I don't think it was so much the gambling. Lots of, as you said, we're sort of a nation of gamblers. Lots of people enjoy a little bit of gambling here and there. No, it wasn't that. It was the fact that it could be insider information. It was a stitch up. It was sort of, in their words, another example of them sort of putting this sort of stuff before the voters' interest, before what they were meant to be doing. But I think the properly damaging thing for Rishi Sunak is that we're sitting here talking about this today, that, as you said at the beginning, all media coverage is about this. It's actually really hard for things to cut through in an election campaign. There's so much noise, especially since Nigel Farage re-entered the campaign, for example. You've got everyone fighting for media attention. And we found the only things that have really cut through this campaign at all have been Nigel Farage coming back, D-Day, leaving D-Day early, and this Gamblegate stuff. Now, none of those are good for Rishi Sunak. And when you're a prime minister that called an early election 20 points behind in the polls with the worst ever approval ratings for a prime minister at this point in his premiership, you did not want the things to cut through to be negative, to reinforce negative opinions. You needed to change the narrative, and this has just embedded it further.
Henry, I mean, whatever ends up happening about all of these things, and some people will be investigated, maybe there'll be prosecutions, maybe there won't be. But you can certainly say that, people have been stupid. I think that's an uncontroversial thing to say. What is it about the psyche of politicians, do you think, that allows them to do things that if you said to any of them, would you be happy for that to be in the Daily Mail or in the news generally, they would all go, obviously people go, oh yeah, maybe not. But they don't think. Is it risk? Is it the attraction of getting caught? What is it?
Yeah, they're all writing their serial killer letters to the new local police department. I mean, I don't know if it is a political thing to be. Politicians get caught, and it's much higher profile. But if you were to ask me how many people do things in their day-to-day life that they would not want printed on the front page of a newspaper or even posted on their social media or told to their friends, I imagine it's quite a lot.
No, of course, but
I don't think
politicians have to bank on the fact that what they're doing will be in the news.
Well, I think if you're for the two politicians, it's just absolutely extraordinary. Also, the fact they didn't even go to the bare minimum level of effort, right? Like they didn't even get friends to do it. Like just extraordinary. But I think if you're someone, I think some of the ones that Conservative members are angriest about are the senior staff at CCHQ, the people who have a really important role in running the campaign. But if you're in one of those back office roles, right? If you're the head of data at CCHQ, I don't think you necessarily think of yourself as a politician or a public figure, and maybe you don't have that mindset. But I mean, you're a political journalist. There are these stories all the time, maybe not about gambling, but maybe about sexual impropriety or this, that, and the other. Like it might be, as you say, that at this point you simply have to have a relatively high risk appetite or poor judgment to go into politics in the first place. I
mean, the other thing you thought when this broke and Keir Starmer and Ned Davey, started saying very disapproving things was, are you sure? Are you sure you want to go there? Are you sure you haven't got people doing similar things on your side? And before too long, hey presto, they've got one. Goodness knows how many others.
Ed Davey has done an interview today and it's wonderful. So it starts out with him saying, this is terrible, we need a review, this can't carry on, should MPs be betting? And then he's asked, so have you ever had a bet? He's like, yeah, I've had a flutter on some sports. Like, what about politics? I mean, yeah, I've had a flutter on some. What about Lib Dem politics? Yeah. I mean, I might have put a bet on North Shropshire on the by-election. Might have put a bet, but I won that one. So, and then he does like this whole flip to it. It's like, I mean, that just proves my point, doesn't it? We really need to sort this out.
I must clean myself up.
It's like, okay, so it's not quite as clear cut.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's paraphrasing Macaulay, there's nothing more embarrassing than English politicians in one of their periodic spasms of morality. But there is a genuine story here about inside betting, which is already illegal and is being investigated. Alleged inside betting, which is already illegal and is being properly investigated.
It affects a very small number of people.
Yeah.
And then that has somehow pivoted because of this Labour person into a general thing about betting. And if you told Sir Keir Starmer a month ago, one of your candidates in an unwinnable seat has put a punt against himself at the election, he wouldn't have blinked twice. But it's so easy as a politician or as a commentator to adopt the pious tone and go, Krishnan, what really matters is what this says about our political culture. And before you know it, you've got Sue Gray setting up some kind of commission to control when politicians can bet. It's absurd. This story is turning from a serious but quite small story into an absurd moral panic.
Right. Well, so what does this tell us about our political culture, Scarlett,
Great.
that we ought to be concerned about?
I mean, I think Henry's got a point there in that I remember I was sort of listening to an interview this morning, and someone said, it's wrong that politicians might be treating politics like sport, and that made me think as well, because obviously I've been very busy this campaign. I've been doing a lot of things like we're doing now, and we are sort of the whole thing, all of the media apparatus around it. Obviously, there's some serious and important, but it is a race.
It's
exactly.
A competition.
That's what I mean. It's a competition. It's a sport. We treat it as such. We cover it as such, and it's then where do you start drawing those lines? And I think Henry's right. You do have to be careful about getting too on your high horse. I do think, though, that the when it all gets bundled together like this, if you're sort of an everyday sort of consumer of this stuff, you might not be picking up on the differences between X and Y. You might just be thinking, oh God, it's another gamble.
Well, that's the big question, I think, because I have looked at some of the reactions, particularly amongst Conservatives who have been censorious about this, like Michael Gove, for example, who sort of said, well, this takes us back to the whole expenses scandal. And you kind of wonder whether what they're hoping for is that this drives voter apathy and that it just turns people off politicians full stop. They're all the same. They're all on the make. They're all on the take. And that people will disengage.
Well, voters are already pretty much there. I don't know whether turnout will be particularly low this election. It always sort of hovers between, or in recent history, 60 and sort of 70%. Last election was actually the slightly higher end. I'm not sure whether we're going to come out with an election that's unprecedentedly low turnout. Everyone sort of is one of the key questions a lot of pollsters are trying to get right. But I do think, regardless of whether people actually come out and put a cross in the box, that sense of voter apathy, that all of them being the same, that is still so pervasive. I've talked to Paul about this before, but it's really, really striking that there is such a lack of trust in politicians and their ability to fix the country that actually, if that was what Michael Gove was doing, which I've got no idea, there's no need. People are already there.
What about the media's role in this then? To be a little bit self-critical, Paul. Well, I mean,
actually, I have got one confession for you on this. So the night before the election was called, I was sat having a coffee with a very senior political strategist who you will all know, and they were telling me that they made a bet months and months ago on a July election, and they placed it on one of the betting sites where if you're looking like it's a no-hoper during the course, they can buy the bet back off you, or if it's looking like it's going to go really well, they can buy it off you for cheaper. And he was saying, it started spiking. Like, we should put on a bet. Like, looking like a July election is more likely. This was the night before the election was called. Thankfully, I am far too lazy for that, so I did not put a bet on. I've not been drawn into this in one way whatsoever. But it is just gambling on timings of elections happens. And a lot has been made in the media of there was a spike, the day before the election was called. It was actually the last date where you could put a bet on, or it was the last day you could put on a bet, because the next day was pretty much the last day Rishi Sunak could announce an election. An election actually happened in July because Parliament was breaking up after that. So, the spike in bets was like $2,500. So
the spike may have been informed or not. It may have just been a guess.
The spike was $2,500. That's like 100 people doing a 20 quid bet.
But what I wanted to talk about, though, is every time you hear a media report saying, well, the Conservative campaign has been completely overshadowed by the betting scandal, it's been overshadowed because the media have decided to cover the betting scandal and not the policy announcement. That's the truth. And So the overshadowing is a conscious decision by media organisations. And what that means is you're not talking about hard, detailed policy. You're not talking about the stuff that Labour's not being quizzed about at the moment. Labour's barely been quizzed about foreign affairs or the detail of its health policy or anything like that. The media's got a role in this, hasn't it?
Yeah, I blame you anchors.
Yes.
You're terrible. You're the worst. If only you could direct the show better.
I do think part of it is that it's something we sort of hear a lot, because I'm always trying to tell people, no, we still don't actually know a lot. Like, we really don't know what the final result is going to be. We I think all pollsters now will say, yes, it's going to be a Labour win, probably quite a sizable one. But in terms of the seats that everyone ends up, how many seats Reform get, how low the Conservatives go, all of that is still very unquestionable. But I think the problem is, I think if there's a campaign where the sort of binary result appears like a foregone conclusion, then I think there's less coverage of what you think is going to happen, what are the different things that can drive that, and more coverage on things like this.
Also, I think sort of if you're looking at the structure of the media and part of the problem, one of the things that was a particular bugbear of mine, and this was housing, which is my very special policy hobby horse, is Michael Gove last year did a big speech on housing, some really interesting stuff in it. And then there was a Q&A with the press, and they'd invited the political correspondents. And so half of them didn't ask about anything in the speech. They just asked about like whatever the sort of scandal du jour was. And I think that actually, if you want policy coverage, part of the problem is that there's a lot of great policy coverage in the specialist press, right? You can go and you can read Defence Journal, you can read the Health Service Journal, you can go and read stuff in all kinds. But political correspondents, naturally, and I include myself in this to an extent, we have a tendency to look at the horse race, to look at the sort of the gladiatorial combat sport, the who's up, who's down. And it's hard to shift out of that into doing really granular policy stuff, especially when, I mean, the parties don't really want you doing it either, because both of their manifestos are just sort of exercises in euphemism.
Talking to candidates, one of the things they'd be most annoyed about is that, you know, on the coverage, is that the Conservative Party have given us all sticks to beat their own party with time and time again during this election. The Gamblegate thing, or whatever we call it, Bettinggate thing, is just the latest. And the thing that a lot of the candidates are annoyed about is that every single week there has been yet another thing that has been a gift to Labour, whether or not it's been calling the election in the middle of the pouring rain with things can only get better blaring out the side, whether it's been leaving D-Day early and now this. Yeah, every single...
Yeah. And these have been the only stories because Labour's not giving us stories.
But I suppose
because there's no new policy.
I would suppose the question for you is: Have you done a political forecast on any deep policy dives over the course of the election? Because you're doing one on the gambling scandal.
We have, but I mean, it is one of. I mean, it's one of the things that is kind of worrying me about this particular story, that it's 5 days old now or whatever. And as you're right, because in this phase of the campaign, we would normally be turning to try and scrutinise Labour and look at all the things it's got away with so far without really, it said we're going to do, 40,000 new health appointments. Well, how exactly? All that kind of stuff that you would be focusing in on isn't being done. And that only gets done by the pack mentality of the media correspondents at press conferences. It's all very well an individual programme doing an individual item. It doesn't have purchase until everybody does it at the same time.
But I think that voters aren't actually voting on policy, particularly this election. So I think it's not, I don't think any policy Rishi Sunak could have set out would have necessarily changed people's minds. That's partly because they're people across at the last 14 years of record. That's what they say. Well, we say we're not going to judge you by what you will say. We're going to judge you by what you have done, and we don't like it. And then even if they were going to, they don't believe he's still going to be around because all the voters think they know the answer to this election too. And then with the Labour Party has not given very much away. Voters don't particularly like it. We sort of already touched on voter apathy, but they've already priced all of that in. I don't think people are thinking there's going to be one policy that moves. Now, we did see that before Farage came back, before D-Day, things like taxation was emerging as a bigger hesitation for voting Labour. So there were signs that maybe the Conservatives could have, if it had moved to a more sort of policy-based thing without all these other things, maybe got a little bit of wiggle room. But I don't think people, I don't necessarily, obviously I think people want to know what this sort of expected Labour government is going to do, but I don't think that's really driving their vote at the moment.
I think the one the Tories will really regret overshadowing is last week. Was it last week? There was the start of a story about council tax. Yes. Now, that was going to spook a lot of people because they would talk about redoing council tax bans. An awful lot of voters were very worried about that, and yet it's come and gone, right? And I think when the Tories are counting however many seats they have left on July 5th, the fact that they allowed stories like that to get smothered by this is going to cost them dearly.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's all briefly look now ahead to Election Day next week. In just a minute each, how do you think things are going to play out?
I think it's going to be a very bad election for the Conservatives, but I think we might also be looking at a record low vote share combined for both main parties. My final thing on that is there was a YouGov model that came out, showed the Labour with their biggest win they've ever had, but on less of a share of the vote than Corbyn got in 2017. And I feel like that tells you everything you need to know about the state of politics in this country at the moment.
Henry?
I think the Tories are going to be on somewhere between 100 120 seats is probably going to be my bet. Not that I'm actually betting, just to be clear. And the interesting thing for me will be, one, who's left from the Tory party, because that's obviously going to affect things like the leadership contest and so on. But two, if Labour win, in the same way that the Red Wall Tories changed the dynamic and the debate inside the Parliamentary Conservative Party, if Labour have suddenly won a load of MPs in true blue shires that they'd never expect to win, what's that going to do to the internal debate in the Labour Party over the next few years? That's what I'm looking forward to.
And I shouldn't do this, but let me just ask you another question, which is about Farage.
Mm-hmm.
Has he damaged his ability to take over the Conservative Party?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely he has. I think it remains to be seen whether or not it affects reform on the day. They might still win some seats, I don't know. But he has reinforced the cordon sanitaire between the Conservative Party and Reform UK, because I'm hearing behind the scenes that leadership candidates are quietly assuring potential MPs that they will not have a deal with Farage because of what he's done over Ukraine and all the rest of it.
Paul?
I'm just hoping to get some sleep. July 5th comes around, I'm going to have a good long sleep and then reassess after that.
Thank you all very much indeed. That is the Political Forecast. Until next time, bye-bye.